The Jets may have slipped in yesterday's matchup against the Toronto Maple Leafs, but at least the Jets were able to come away with a victory on the road against the Calgary Flames over this past weekend. Find out how they did it on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we're going to be turning back the clocks a bit and just chatting about the weekend game, Jets versus Flames. Yesterday, I prioritized giving you some insights into Winnipeg versus Toronto because it was the Jets' first loss of the season. So, obviously, Winnipeg over the weekend ended up beating the Flames 5-3 in what was a pretty entertaining, rather low event game, but the scoreline was kind of crazy. So I did want to chat just a little bit about that and some takeaways from the weekend. But before we go any further, did want to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the weekend game against the Flames was, at least, on paper, kind of a strange one. You look at the final scoreline, and, Eric Comrie was in net. There was some chaos. And at the end of it, somehow the Jets won a pretty wild and woolly affair, 5-3. And I don't know that the Jets or Flames actually generated much in terms of quality looks at goal. It was a lot of weird stuff that went in. You had Wolf letting in this one goal where Sandberg just sort of hit a puck off the backboards behind Wolf, and somehow it just landed on Wolf's back. He didn't know anything more than that, and it bounced off his back and into the net. And that's how, Winnipeg ended up coming away with a really important go-ahead goal at the time. And then, of course, Calgary ended up getting a Kadri goal towards the end of the game to tie it. But, I mean, you just had crazy things. Like Comrie had some goals go off the side of his head into the net, angles that you don't typically see. We saw Kyle Connor score a shorthanded goal, which is, pretty interesting. Not something that you really expect all that often, but really good signs that the power kill was working. But if you had to really take away anything from this game, I would say that it was more that the Jets were just persistent, and, Calgary took a lot of penalties. At the end of the game, I think the Flames had something like 20 or 22 minutes in penalties, which, with the Jets' special teams being particularly special this year, wasn't great for the Flames. The game winner ended up coming off of Cole Perfetti on the power play on a great shot. Just like that, Perfetti has been basically a point per game for the last several games. Obviously, yesterday, I don't think he actually hit the score sheet against Toronto, but on the whole, he has had a super effective season and, a really impressive start to the year after, the first game kind of being maybe a little bit slower. So as he's warmed up, things have sort of fallen his way. But I think this game against Calgary was just a bit of a wacky one because neither team really got much dangerous, right in front of their goalies, but then somehow they ended up scoring some sort of wacky ones. And I think if there's something the Jets probably won't love, it's the fact that they gave away the puck a little too cheaply. I think the Jets probably won't love the amount of turnovers and bad passes that they made, but they didn't really get punished for most of it. Rasmus Anderson scoring something off of like the side of Comrie's helmet, probably not the most repeatable of opportunities. Kadri finding himself alone, on a late shift, probably, again, not something that's going to happen as much to Winnipeg, but, it is what it is. Nikolai Ehlers banked one off of somebody. I think it may have been a defender or something to score. So just all sorts of strangeness. This is probably a spooky-ish game if you think about the oddities and strangeness of a pre-Halloween matchup where, weren't really sure what to expect with this one because the Flames have had a pretty strong record to start the season, but Winnipeg, of course, had a stronger record, and in this game ended up prevailing. I think it was a deserved win for Winnipeg, but certainly not one where they necessarily dominated. It was a very back and forth affair. Both teams, I think, were kind of playing some low event hockey, and it just so happened that the Jets ended up coming out on top because Winnipeg special teams truly are special. That continues to be a trend this year for the Jets. They have some of the most lethal power play stuff you've ever seen. Right now, they have the number one power play in the league, and their PK has done a pretty impressive job. The PK isn't just something that looks like it's doing well because the save percentage is high. They're actually limiting a fair number of chances against, especially of the more dangerous kind. And really, that's something the Jets PK hasn't done in many years, or perhaps ever, really. We haven't really had a decent PK in some time. We had one in the first year of Bones, and that was like a league average PK, which was admittedly pretty impressive. This one probably will do a bit better this year. Already, I see more aggression. I see some cool things. I do like what I've seen so far. And to see the way that Kyle Connor actually got his shorthanded goal, where he basically just outmuscled Blake Coleman, that was an impressive effort, absolutely deserved, and glad that Connor ended up, coming away with a goal that he frankly worked very hard for. Even if the top line continues to be a bit of a black hole, Connor, in my mind, has been, the strongest overall player. Speaking of the top line, I do have some questions about that one later because I think that there's a bit of a growing HR issue with the Jets, and it's been a problem for a while now. But I think as Winnipeg tries to navigate these waters with a top line that doesn't really work super well, and some fans, myself included, and probably the coaching staff wanting to make some changes that maybe there are other factions not interested in seeing happen, you start to wonder who's kind of running the ship, right? And I think it's real difficult in games where you're facing opponents that have your number, that have pressed you really aggressively, and the Jets want to make some adjustments and stuff, but so far they haven't been able to keep it all together. So some interesting food for thought, but we'll chat about that a little more in just a bit. In terms of this game, though, I mean, like the Jets probably didn't need to be perfect against Calgary, and they weren't. But at the end of the day, they got the job done. The Flames, for their part, have had a really nice start to the year. I think, part of that start, it's hard to say that it's necessarily sustainable. I mean, this team is probably more in the rebuilding camp, and I think, the last few losses have started to show that that offensive depth that they're lacking is definitely a problem. They don't have, the craziest forward grouping, and I think this is where Winnipeg just sort of eventually won out, right? The lack of talent and the Jets just beating them in a number of key skill categories probably was enough to win this one out. But the scoreline was still closer than it needed to be. It was a little dicey, a little hairy, but the Jets were able to preserve their 8-game win streak. Everything ended well, and we moved on to, unfortunately, yesterday's performance. So, yeah, bit of a tough loss. But, I did mention earlier that I sort of wonder who's making some of these decisions, and I want to chat about a particularly interesting question because with this one, I want to know, how much, runway does Arniel have to make the changes that he needs? We saw him yesterday and in previous games make some adjustments, but we haven't seen him do it on a consistent enough basis to where he's running brand new line combos routinely. I want to chat about that in just a quick moment because I think it does have a pretty tangible impact on the squad. But before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $5. If you bet $5, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, just bet $5 and you can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Maybe you're watching a Ravens game or a Vikings game. two of the more fun squads to watch this year, although in Baltimore's case, a little more chaotic, I guess. But you might still be getting a hunch in the middle of one of these games. While you're at it, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bet. All you have to do is just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all with FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. While we're at it, I did also want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are probably used to adding a ticket to your cart and seeing the price double when you finally go to check out. And you ask yourself, did I accidentally add an extra ticket? Nope, you just got hit with a bunch of surprise fees and charges that weren't listed up front. And no one likes that. Gametime doesn't either, and that's why they allow you to toggle all-in pricing, which shows you what you're paying up front when you switch it on. It's a really helpful feature. It saves you time and money, and you're not just sitting there getting big surprises as you're putting your credit card in for a checkout. And they even offer you a brand new feature called Gametime Picks, which filters out all the fluff to show you only the hottest deals on the best seats. They want you to go to whatever concert or game you're off to and enjoy yourself, but make sure that you're not wasting time trying to find the best deal. And you can even see seat views before you buy. Gametime also comes back with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. They not only give you all these guarantees, they really do curate deals to make it easier to find the best deals on the hottest seats in town. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about, some interesting, questions on who is kind of, running the Jets right now. And I think it sounds a little bit silly for me to ask this. You might be saying, what is the point? Why are we having this conversation? And I think it's worth having because, Winnipeg has a number of line combination issues where, parts of this team are working perfectly and other parts are not really working that well. And the parts that aren't working that well are the ones that the Jets kind of have to get more out of. Particularly the skill lines. Like the Nemesnikov line has been okay. I think it's been better as of late, but you saw in the game against Toronto, it was still not great. And frankly, it took them forever to actually get anything going. And it was more so when Ehlers was stripped off of that line and moved up to the first line that new look like of Connor and Perfetti ended up seeming okay. The top line, though, continues to be the biggest offender. They're like a -7 or a -8 now on the season as a unit. At even strength, not so much on the power play. When they're not on even strength, they're brilliant. Like they are just so good on the power play and with the extra man when the goalie's pulled. But when they're playing at 5v5, which is the majority of what they're going to be playing at together, it's not a great story so far this year. And I'd probably not be sounding the alarm if it wasn't something that we had evidence of not working last year, but we kind of see the same trends. I think they're maybe a little bit unlucky to have had, as many goals against, and some of the stuff that's been conceded while they're on the ice really wasn't their fault, but I think it's just the broader trend of them not really giving you enough offensively to justify keeping them all together. Now, I've thought this for a while, past couple of years, and one thing that really stands out is that, the coaching staffs seem to have to keep Connor and Scheifele together. And like Connor and Scheifele have said that they like playing together, and somewhere along the line that has basically become a rule. You don't really see any NHL coaches that have come through Winnipeg actually adjusting that pairing for more than a couple of games. Last year it was kind of out of necessity because Connor got hurt. But beyond that, as soon as he got healthy, he was back on the first line with Scheifele. And it feels like Winnipeg has sort of put itself in a box, whether it's, maybe from the front office, maybe from ownership. Somebody has given Scheifele and Connor the blessing to play together this way. And I feel like at some point it's putting the rest of the team in jeopardy when they're truly, they're truly treating this combo like it's unbreakable, rather than kind of giving the coaching staff the ability to make this call themselves. I think Arniel's comments, after the Leafs game yesterday were more him trying to shield his players because he knows that the top line just isn't working. And I think he's starting to show hints that he wants to change things, but for one reason or another, he doesn't have the authority to do so. Whether it's some player that's getting more say in their ice time or whatever, it feels like Arniel perhaps hasn't had the ability to make the changes that he necessarily wants for more than a few shifts. And I sort of wonder, I was really pissed about the way that they ended the game yesterday, going back to the same lines that didn't work before. I almost wonder if that was a bit intentional, as maybe Arniel kind of tipping his hand that, like, this is what happens when you guys don't stick with what I think is the better plan. Maybe he kind of showed that, when you reunite the old lines, they actually don't do that well, because immediately once that happened, the Jets lost control of the last few shifts of the game, and their entire comeback bid just died. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but it also wouldn't shock me if maybe there's something to that. He's kind of like, well, you asked for this and you still lost, so maybe you can just trust my way. And the reason I sort of wonder about this is because the last couple of games, he started messing with the top line a little more. He benched him for a shift in one of the recent games. That might have been the Kraken game or something. And then he broke them up in, yesterday's game for most of the third period. And so I'm just wondering if he's starting to poke at the margins and kind of show where he's thinking, because, he put Connor and Perfetti together, which worked well last year. And he also put, Ehlers, Scheifele, and Velarde together for a handful of shifts, and immediately the complexion of the game changed. And everyone will say, score effects and all that, and that's not false necessarily. But by the same token, the Jets' offense actually still got to work, and they started taking care of business. They started drawing penalties, all that stuff. And so I don't want to discredit that either. And it came from making the line changes. And so for me, for whatever criticism I do have, I kind of, maybe I'm going to walk back some of the stuff about the coaching staff specifically. It may just be that Arniel yet does not have the trust and the authority to make this call. And if that's the case, I feel like, again, this is, stuff that really should have been resolved before. And I don't think it's fair to the coaching staff that they can't make their moves that they want. I don't know where the decision really lies, if it's with ownership, if it's with the players, if it's with the front office. Clearly, somebody is kind of making it harder for the Jets to, adjust in game the way that they need to. There has been some mandate to keep these two together, to keep them happy. And I get that the Jets are a small market and that you want to keep your star players happy, but I think at some point somebody has to have the hard conversation that it's really handicapping the rest of the team. And it's true. Keeping these two together limits so many other line combinations for the Jets, and frankly makes this team just not as good. The best way that you can keep Connor and Scheifele together without being completely overwhelmed is to have Ehlers with them. But for obvious reasons, that does come with some, concerns. Ehlers, Connor, and Scheifele all together are not exactly defensively attuned, and so they're going to give up more. That's why having Velarde up there, I think, is a much better presence than having Ehlers just added to the original mix, because you have more defensive spine. You have, a strong forward-checking presence on the wing. You've got Ehlers, who's your transition guy, and Scheifele, who's just a very smart all-around attacker who can basically do whatever it is that you ask of him. And I think that for me also kind of feeds into me not loving Scheifele's effort recently. I don't want to say that he's not working hard, because I don't think that's true. But I've come to feel like the last few games, maybe we just haven't seen the best of Scheifele. There's a clear difference with him when he feels really engaged versus him kind of going through the motions. And I feel like especially the last couple of games, it's been more of going through the motions. And I don't know what it takes to get him going. I don't know what it takes for him to really buy in. But I just feel like we haven't seen his best. And it's a shame, because there's a version of Scheifele that I do believe is one of the best players on this team. But it takes a lot to get to that point. And if he's not bought in, and if he's not really, giving 100% on his shifts, you're not going to get to it. That version of him that can control the game and be an absolute menace, I just don't feel like we've seen enough of it this year so far. And I know the score sheet looks nice. His box score looks very pleasant. But I think if you look at the way that he's actually playing and what he's done this year, I've not been enamored. I haven't really felt like we've just gotten the version of Scheifele that I think he can be. And I'm not going to sit here and say like he's the only player that perhaps I'd like to see more out of. Velarde for me hasn't really impressed either, to be honest. But at least with Velarde, I think it might be more of a stylistic thing. With Scheifele, I just need to see more, period. I know what he's capable of. We all do. And it's a shame when we see, the player who's not necessarily, at 100%. Maybe he's dealing with a nagging injury or something. I don't know. But if it is an effort thing, I think it would be a little disappointing. This is a time when the Jets really have an opportunity to make hay, and the record looks good, and I think that there's a lot to be happy with, but there are also a lot of things to work on and improve, and it starts with the top line and the skill lines. You really get those going, and the Jets are going to be a different team. Winnipeg already has like some of the other parts that a lot of teams don't get, like the goaltending, a relatively decent defensive structure, the depth scoring. They've got that stuff figured out, but it's the top talent that they still haven't been able to really get moving in the right direction yet. There are flashes, but not enough to where it's consistent. And I think that's where somebody has to step up for this team, make the hard decisions, and get everyone on the same page. And I think it'll take some time for Arniel to really earn that trust. But the fact that he's already kind of poking around with some of this stuff, I mean, it must mean that he's seeing the same things that we are and that he's thinking about it, but that there's still something holding him back from making these changes permanent. But at least, in the interim, it is, I guess, encouraging that he is thinking about it. So, whether or not it materializes into anything permanent, we'll see. I'm curious to know what tomorrow's lineups look like against Detroit. But, I will give Arniel plenty of credit so far. I think that he's made some really good adjustments in some of these games, and I think he does agree with a lot of us, but I think it's just how you do the HR and locker room management that's still kind of the hard thing for him until he gets full buy-in. But, if the Jets keep winning and if they keep, having some of the same issues, maybe he'll start to convince people that the way he's thinking about things could improve things even further, especially if they start losing. So we'll keep an eye on that. But obviously, the Jets are about to face Detroit, and I think that that's a really intriguing opponent. They're not a team that I think has done super well to start the year. The entire Atlantic Division is basically around the same record, kind of hovering around 500, which is not great. But, that doesn't mean that you can take a team like Detroit lightly. They've got some very intriguing talent, and I think the Jets would be remiss to overlook yet another feisty opponent. So we'll chat about what the lines are looking like for Detroit and who might stand out for this team in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, just wanted to shout out our folks and friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in prizes awarded, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long because, you know what, PrizePicks offers great features to put their members first. They offer Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals, and, they're always fast, safe, and secure, and you get your money in as little as 15 minutes. They've also invented the flex play, which means that if your lineup isn't perfect, you can still cash out, which is great. Like, things happen. They even have an injury insurance policy, so if somebody leaves the game midway, your lineup will still stay active. We all know that sometimes your lineup is going to have mistakes. You're going to have missed calls. Just look at some of my other sports leagues out there, and I don't do so well with fantasy, but for those of you who have ever had some of this stuff happen, Lord knows it can be a pain, but PrizePicks wants you to still have a chance to win. And of course, if you get as little as 4 correct picks, you can still win 100 times your cash. And you even get a sign-up bonus today, $50, when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just guaranteed. If you think that the Jets are going to score more than 3 goals, maybe you want to do the over on 3.5 goals for the Jets against Detroit. That could be a fair bet. Winnipeg's probably pissed about how it played against Detroit. But either way, it's a big game tomorrow, and PrizePicks can help you make it an even bigger victory, especially if Winnipeg also happens to win. All you have to do is download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are just closing out tonight's episode with a couple of quick thoughts on, the Jets ahead of their game against Detroit. The Red Wings are not a great opponent. They're not the strongest of teams, but they're still, feisty enough to where the Jets probably don't want to sleep on them. And look, in this league, any given day, a team can beat you. Toronto had just lost to Columbus and St. Louis before humbling the Jets. So anything could happen. This is a league of any given Sunday. And I think for a team like the Red Wings that have sort of underperformed a bit, this is going to be a tough opponent for the Jets. You look at their top 9, and there's quite a bit of talent for, the Red Wings to draw upon. Your first line is DeBrincat, Larkin, and Raymond. I know Raymond's maybe had a slower start to the year, but that's still a really lethal trio. And, Larkin, I think, is maybe one of the more unheralded centers out there. Kind of has that little bit of Scheifele in him, right? Maybe a guy who's not like the world's most elite top-line center, but he does a lot of things really well. And maybe he gets less credit that he deserves when he's at his best. Your second line, familiar friend, Andrew Kopp, of course, is still playing there. Been a tougher spell for him since joining Detroit, but, always still rooting for him in a way. You've got him centered by Compher and joined by Kane on the wing. Yep, that Kane, Patrick Kane, still there, still playing hockey, despite kind of getting up there in years. Your third line, you've still got even more old veteran names of former goal-scoring greats in Tarasenko, joined by Marco Kasper and Berggren. Berggren, still a developing young talent and somebody who's very exciting. So, there's a lot to like for the future for the Red Wings, even if the present is maybe a little underwhelming. Your fourth line is Rasmussen, Veleno, and Fisher. So, the Jets are going to have a very intriguing matchup. I think this fourth line is pretty talented, and it kind of reminds me of the Jets' fourth line, maybe with even a little more extra skill on top. So this is probably one of the deeper, more balanced opponents the Jets are likely to face, at least up front. On defense, bit of a different story. They've got Edvinsson and Seider as your first pairing, Sherratt and Petrie as your second, and Mata and Gustafsson as your third. Everything past the first pairing, probably not ideal. It's not, significantly worse than what the Jets are probably putting out on a routine basis. But even like Samberg, Pionk, given what the last game was, I expect them to bounce back. They have to smoke Sherratt and Petrie. Like, this has to be a matchup where the Jets second pairing is just way better. Winnipeg's top pairing probably not as good because DeMello has really struggled, but like the Jets' third pairing of Fleury and Miller, hopefully, I think Stanley's probably played himself to the bench this time, but Fleury and Miller should be able to handle their minutes. So I think the Jets have a nice advantage on the blue line sort of side of things, but obviously things can play out a little bit differently, especially if somebody has a bad night like they did in the last game. In net, they've got Lyon and Talbot. So, this all points to like a winnable game, but I just, after yesterday's performance, I don't want to jinx it. So I'm still going to call the Jets victory. I'll say 3-2. Give me your score predictions below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Let's hope Winnipeg can recover and start a new win streak. I think they'll have a fair few number of win streaks this year. Just a question of how many games they end up being. So again, drop your score predictions below, but for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.